Hi students, this is Professor Ahern and welcome to Marketing 3336 Principles of Marketing. Today we're going to be covering the content from Chapter 4 of Principles of Marketing, Kotler and Armstrong. The title of this chapter is Managing Marketing Information to Gain Customer Insights. Now, a lot of this chapter is about the utilization of data within the organization and outside the organization to be able to more effectively make decisions as a company. This has become a really important area. And in fact, many of the jobs that are coming out in marketing right now, particularly here in the United States, are around the area of what we call oftentimes market research, market analytics, or data insights. So these are the types of positions that are coming out. And so an understanding of the material in this and an understanding of effective decision making is critical from anybody with regard to their ability to be able to advance in some sort of an organization, particularly large organizations and also smaller organizations looking for startups and or data to be able to inspire investors for the organization. So I hope you enjoy the material today. We're going to actually discuss some application problems, and hopefully we find this interesting. So let's start off by defining what managing marketing information is. And this just talks a little bit about our book's discussion of what we call the marketing information system. This refers to the people and procedures dedicated to assessing information needs, developing the needed information, and helping decision makers to use the information to generate and validate actionable customer and market insights. What does that mean? That means any organization, whether it be small or large, has individuals, their job is to be able to gather information and analyze information to be able to assist in the decision making of the organization. That's what this talks about here. And this understanding of marketing information and customer insights is critical to the success of organizations. It's just like any decision you make. If you make a decision blindly, there's a very good chance that you make a bad decision. Those people who make decisions with full information in front of them are the ones who are going to make the best decisions. So the idea is to get yourself armed with as much valuable information as possible in order to make effective decisions in the organization to effectively advance the mission of the organization itself. So let's talk about this chapter and talk more about this managing of marketing information. So this is a very important framework because it really shows us all the internal functions and what the marketing information function in the organization looks like for most organizations. Now, I want to point out that there's a couple of critical things here that many of you probably are not as familiar with within organizations itself. So let's look at this first. So if we look inside the very middle of this, called developing needed information, right in the center of this figure, okay? So if we look at this, we see three things. We see what we call internal databases, marketing intelligence, and market research. These are the ways in which we compile information as an organization in order to be able to make these decisions. So this is the actual function of compiling that information. So we may have internal databases within our firm. So those internal databases are like CRM systems, for example, customer relationship management systems. They track all the purchases, all the contacts with customers, everything that a customer does with our organization, that could show up in our internal databases. We may have internal databases also that talk about promotion information. Every time we've reached out or contacted a customer in any way, that could be in our databases as well. So that's what we call internal databases. Anything internal to the organization itself that can be useful for us in helping to make marketing decisions. The next function that we have of collecting information is called marketing intelligence. What marketing intelligence does is it scans the marketplace as a whole for information about what's happening in the marketplace as a whole, but also with our competitors. So I'll give you an example of this. Many companies do a routine web monitoring or what we often call social media monitoring system that goes out and looks at all of our major competitors and any announcement that they make, anything that goes up on their website, any details that the government makes on announcements, any compliance announcements, anything like that that could affect our business as an organization is routinely monitored. By capturing all this information, we can then use this information to help make better marketing decisions because we know everything that has been publicly released about our competition, as well as any of the entities that govern our competition as well in those markets. So this is also very important information. And then lastly, we have what we call the market research function or marketing research function. Within companies themselves, companies typically have what we call a marketing research department. And what this department does is it collects two different kinds of information. One is it goes out there and it actually works with companies or vendors to help collect information about customers or potential customers out in the marketplace, their attitudes. We could be doing focus group interviews. We could be collecting information through surveys. All kinds of information like this is very valuable for us. So those are the three ways in which we collect information. We're going to go into some more detail on each of those and talk about the value of that information. Now, if we think about that, all of this information is compiled in the prospectus of, first of all, the marketing environment. We've talked about this marketing environment. We have the marketing environmental factors, the publics, the competitors. We have the marketing channels and the target markets. We're looking at all of this information to see what's going on out there and getting full data to be able to help make decisions. We're then taking this information and analyzing and using this information. We're assessing more information needs on this part. And as a result of that, that is fed into our organization so that our organization can make more effective decisions in the marketplace. That's where we obtain customer insights. So we are able to take all this information as it's being processed and utilized, feed it up to our marketing managers, and those marketing managers use that information to make better decisions. And this, again, is what we call the marketing information system, okay? So let's talk about the type of information that organizations compile. And we're going to talk about those three types in some more detail. As I mentioned, we have what we call internal data, marketing intelligence, and market research. So let's talk about these three. We should be very familiar with what these three are because we're going to be referring to these in the future throughout this class. So we should really be familiar with what is internal data. I talked about CRM systems. I talked about databases that we capture for purchasing information or payment information from customers. We talked about market intelligence, where we capture information about what competitors are doing, where the markets are trending. And then we talked about market research, where we go out and do surveys with customers or focus groups or interviews, things like that. So these are the three types. Let's get into detail in this type of information and the advantages and disadvantages of using different types of information. Now, when we collect information, there are two kinds of information that we can use as a company. One is called primary data, and the other is called secondary data. Primary data is data that our company collects specifically for the problem at hand. So I'll give you an example of this. A primary data is our company says, I want to be able to know the satisfaction of all my customers in the marketplace with the way we serve them with regard to our customer service reps. So if a person calls in and needs customer service, let's say that you're calling into Apple and you have a problem with your computer and you're talking to customer service and you want to be able to know how satisfied customers are with your customer service reps, well, what we might do is collect survey information on all these customer service interactions and do a summary survey of this information. That's called primary data collection. Because what we're doing is we're collecting information specifically for the problem at hand. However, many times in organizations, we use something called secondary data because it's very expensive and very costly to always collect data from a primary perspective. What we do is we go out there and we get information, what's called secondary data. Now, secondary data is information that has been collected out there in the marketplace in general or within our firm, not specifically for our problem at hand, but it could be very relevant to everything regarding our problem. So an example of this is if companies are out there, and let's just say some independent agency like the Better Business Bureau is out there collecting information about how satisfied people are with Apple computers versus how satisfied people are with Compaq computers or Hewlett Packard computers, all their customer service. And then we take that information, we get that from the marketplace, and then we utilize that instead of gathering that information ourselves at Apple. That would be called secondary data. Anything that's collected that's not specifically for our problem at hand, but it's out there and we can utilize it for our problems is called secondary data. Now, there's some advantages to using secondary over primary data. One is it tends to be lower cost because we don't have to pay as much to gather this information. We don't have to put as many resources for it. We can oftentimes obtain it quickly because it's already available to us. We can just get it out there and work with it. But we can't we cannot collect otherwise oftentimes this information as well that's secondary. So for example, it may be very difficult for us to assess the satisfaction of people with customer service reps at other companies because we don't know those interactions that happen with people with other companies. So if we're Apple and we want to assess how good our customer service is versus everybody else, we don't know who owns those other computers, and we don't know who's called in for customer service for those other firms. So it would be pretty impossible for us to be able to assess this information. So there's some advantages to secondary data. Some of the disadvantages are sometimes the data is not relevant, and the relevance means that the way the information is collected or the timeliness of the information or things like that makes it so that it's not as valuable. Let's say the data was not current. It was collected years ago, like 2-3 years ago. Well, our customer service may have changed over the last couple of years. It could be not accurate. We don't know who these people are who've collected this information, and we can't validate the accuracy of the information. If we do it ourselves, we can absolutely validate the accuracy of the information. We also maybe not be impartial. What it means by that is the firm that we got it from may have some sort of omission, which is they're being, for example, they're being paid for, their advertising is being paid for by one of our competitors. So when we get this satisfaction with customer service, they may have an incentive to show one of our competitors is better. So we can't verify all these things. So although there are some advantages, there's also disadvantages to using secondary data. So when it's possible, we like to try to get primary information, but if we use secondary data, we have to make sure that that information is very good and relevant and clear. So we have to assess with full knowledge the advantages and disadvantages of that information that we're working with. So let's talk about the types of research that we do within market research and within the marketing information system. There are really 3 types of research. The first is what we call exploratory research. And then the next is what we call descriptive, and then lastly, causal. So exploratory research in particular, when we want to talk about exploratory research is when there's an initial problem that we want to clarify or define the nature of a problem, so we collect exploratory information. It doesn't provide conclusive evidence, and usually subsequent research is expected. So let me give you an example, excuse me, of exploratory research. So we're working on an idea of a new product for Apple that we're getting ready to release to the marketplace. And we want to be able to adapt or change, let's say, something about the iPhone to be able to see what people want in the market. And we have a number of different ideas about the way that we can adapt or change the iPhone. So, and we want to generate other ideas of different ways to improve our iPhone. So we might conduct what we call exploratory research. And that is to be able to identify potential areas of improvement, to understand the nature of a problem, to figure out what's going on. So what we do is we gather maybe a focus group. A focus group, if anyone's participated before, is a group of like 6 to 8 individuals that get together in a room, and they often discuss what's going on with that product or that market. So what we might do is bring in 6 to 8 customers in our target market Those are people maybe that either own iPhones or have some experience with an iPhone. And then we have conversations with them about what do you like and what don't you like about the iPhone? What could be improved? What are some features that we think could be useful? And they help, and they sit around, they talk with amongst each other to generate ideas. Sometimes that idea generation can actually result in new options that we could consider for our phones, or new thoughts about the way to improve our product. Another example of exploratory research. We notice that our sales are going down a bit, particularly with young people, that is under the age of 21. Our sales are fine with all other groups, but under the age of 21, we notice that we're losing sales for our product. So what do? The first thing we might do is actually bring in people under the age of 21 and start talking to them. What is it that you like and dislike about our product? What have you heard about our product? Things like that. So we're doing what we call exploratory research. We're exploring the nature of a problem to better understand what's going on. So that usually requires subsequent research. So let's say we talk to 6 people and we have a feeling that that what's wrong with our product is that people under the age of 21 are not finding it to be as trendy or as popular as older people are. And in fact, other products are more popular, and that our product is being perceived to be something that older people use. Now, that might be what we hear from these 6 to 8 individuals, but the question is that really the perception in the market? Can we really trust 6 to 8 individuals to make that judgment? So that usually requires us to have subsequent or future research to confirm this information or explore those hypotheses more deeply. So that's what we call exploratory research. The next is that and this is probably the most used research type in organizations to be able to help us make decisions. And that's what we call descriptive research. This describes what's happening out there in the marketplace, or describing a problem or the nature of a problem that's occurring for us. So it describes or characterizes what's a phenomena that's happening in the total population. So I'll give you an example of descriptive research. In descriptive research, we might want to monitor our market share. So how are we doing versus the competition in the amount that we're selling? How happy are people with our product versus the competition? What regions of the country are people buying our product versus not buying our product? What are the age groups that buy versus don't buy our product? These are what we call descriptive phenomena. So it gives us some understanding of the nature of what's going on out there, but it's not definitive. So a few examples of these, there are really 2 different types, and this is probably the most important type of research that companies engage in regularly. One is what we call performance monitoring, and the other is what we call environmental scanning. Performance monitoring helps us to monitor how well our products or our brands are doing out there in the marketplace. So I'll give you an example. Procter & Gamble, they monitor their product Tide, which is a detergent product. And they want to see how well Tide is doing in the marketplace. Do we need to make any adaptations on Tide? Like years ago, they introduced the Tide Pods. So they introduced other ways to be able to distribute or utilize Tide. So what they do is they track things like, how profitable is our Tide products? Is our profit going up or down over time? What is our market share like for those? Do people still prefer Tide over other products? How aware are people of the brand Tide? If we mention Tide, what percentage of people out there have heard of it? So that's what we call performance monitoring. It's how well we're doing. But we also use descriptive research to do what we call environmental scanning. And that's when we go out there and we look for things like, what is our competition doing? What are our customers, how are they buying in general? What kind of trade regulations are happening out there? Are there embargoes on China? What are the trade deals between us and Mexico going on right now, or us and Canada? Are our government regulations changing with regard to the distribution or utilization of our product in the marketplace? These are what we call environmental scanning. That scans what's happening out there in the environment that can affect the way we make decisions. So as descriptive research is the most used type of information for companies in making decisions. It includes that performance monitoring aspect and the environmental scanning aspect. Now, causal research is the final type of research, and this is research that's conducted to be able to see a cause-effect outcome. So I'll give you an example of this. We're getting ready to introduce a new advertising campaign for our company, and we want to know if that advertising campaign will result in increased sales of our product. So we want to be able to do some testing to determine what's the best advertising campaign we can use. And is it really give us a return on our investment? So if we spend money on advertising, are we really making our money back by the sale of our products? So what we typically do is we engage in what we call causal research. It makes specific predictions about what happens out there in the marketplace. It estimates what action is the best action to take to be able to advance our effectiveness out in the market. So when we do causal research, and we're going to talk more about causal research because it's becoming very trendy for organizations to think about engaging in causal research, because they want to know if they make a specific decision or action, does that improve their outcomes as an organization, or is it damaging their outcomes as an organization? So can they attribute an outcome to a specific decision? You know, there's causal research that's done all the time with regard to healthcare. Give you an example. They do research on drugs to be able to see how effective drugs are. So for example, if we're coming out with a new drug to treat COVID, what we would do is what we call a double-blinded study. Doctors do this. So what happens is the doctors are given medication, and they're asked to administer it to patients who could potentially have COVID. And they have two forms of medication. One is the real medication that they have that they think will help treat COVID, and the other is what we call a placebo or a sugar pill or a benign injection that they would give a person that doesn't really do anything. But the placebo is to be able to make both the physician and the customer, that is the patient, think to themselves that they've been given the drug itself. So the reason they do this is they want to be able to rule out the effect of the mental effect that placebo has been shown to have. That is, just giving somebody a sugar pill, oftentimes if they don't know that it's nothing significant, still makes people often feel better. So they want to rule out that it's not just the intervention itself, but it's the intervention of the drug itself that causes this to come out positively. So when we do what's called a blinded study, that means that the customer, or in this case the patient, would not know whether they were getting the real thing or they were getting a placebo. When we do a double-blinded study, the doctor who's prescribing it to the patient will not know if the drug that they've been handed is real or a placebo, and the patient will also not know if it's real or placebo. So the doctor can't influence the patient either. Only afterwards is it revealed whether the doctor was given to be able to administer to that patient real medication. So that's what's called double-blinded, and that's when both parties are blind to the administration. And single-blinded is when the outcome agent, that is the customer or the patient, is blinded to it. So oftentimes we'll do causal research to be able to understand the effects of things in the marketplace. So let's talk about how we identify whether there's a cause and effect of something. There are three criteria that we often use to judge whether an action results in an outcome. That is a cause-effect action. So how do we prove that there is a cause-effect relationship? I'll give you an example of this. We roll out, like we talked about before, a new advertising campaign, and we see an increase in sales. Okay. How do we know that that new advertising campaign really increased sales, or something else didn't increase sales out there? Like a competitor went out of business, or customers just started going into the summer and buying more product, or things like this, the alternative explanations. So there are three things we consider when evaluating causality. The first for evidence of causality is the appropriate causal order of events. So did the action precede the outcome? So what I mean by that is, Did we change the advertising campaign and then afterwards see an increase in sales? So we have to see an appropriate order of events. So A has to happen before B. That's the first criteria for causality. That seems pretty obvious. The second is what we call concomitant variation. That is, the two phenomena vary together. So when we put out, every time we put out a new ad campaign, we see an increase in sales. Every time we don't have an ad campaign, we don't see increases in sales. Or that, for example, with our drug example, when we give a person the real drug, we see them getting better. When we don't give them the real drug, we don't see them getting better. So what we see is we see a causality between the two phenomena. The two phenomenon vary together. And that's what we call concomitant variation. So the first is the order of events. The second is that the two move together the way they're supposed to. Lastly, an absence of alternative plausible explanations. So we may have one and two, but not three. I'll give you that example. Our company put out an advertising campaign for our restaurant. We start to see increased sales for our restaurant. It was definitely the causal order, the appropriate causal order of events: ad campaign, increase in sales. We also saw concomitant variation. When we put out ad campaigns, we saw increases in sales. But we maybe at number three hasn't been evaluated. For example, maybe every time we put out an ad campaign, it's just before the summer, and we always see increases in sales in the summer. So we don't know whether it's the summer or the ad campaign. When we put out the ad campaign, a competitor went out of business, or a competitor didn't put an ad campaign in place. So what we see is it's all outside actions outside that aren't controlled to be able to see the effect of that. So we have three things that we typically look at when evaluating causality. So now let's consider a couple examples of survey research. I'm going to see a little video about Allbird and how Allbird uses their survey research. Now, for those of you who don't know Allbirds have become like massively popular, particularly on the West Coast. If you go out there for the IT sector, you see pretty much all these IT gurus out there wearing Allbirds. And Allbirds in the state of Washington or Portland, Oregon, and things like that, super trendy. And this is a little bit about the research they do to be able to monitor their brand and look after their brand on a regular basis. So let's watch this short clip.
As a brand marketer, survey results are just so incredibly important in helping give us the right kind of information to make informed decisions. SurveyMonkey Audience has been instrumental in that.
In this space, the brand is very important. Our short-term and long-term financial performance is dependent on how strong our brand is. It's very, very important for us to keep a close eye on the brand strength, because that's how we're gonna grow.
Today, we're primarily using SurveyMonkey Audience to continue to keep a pulse on our brand health. Are the messages that we're putting out there resonating with the right groups of people? Are we putting our energies behind the right types of activities?
The wide variety of questions we're trying to answer through SurveyMonkey Audience. We want to monitor our top of the funnel metrics, which is awareness, perception, and consideration. We are also using SurveyMonkey Audience to explore consumer behavior in the new market where we want to launch.
We're constantly looking at the results that we get from SurveyMonkey Audience to really understand how are we tracking with some of our brand goals, and trying to understand how are those results differing by various segments of gender or age or city, etc., and really using those to fine-tune our strategy moving forward.
As an analytics professional, I cannot be casual with numbers, but I'm sure in long run we are ROI positive using SurveyMonkey Audience.
Market research is incredibly important in thinking about and understanding where the opportunities are for future growth of the brand and the business. SurveyMonkey Audience lets us hear from more people more instantaneously.
All right. So that's a little bit about how Allbirds uses it. You can see that Allbirds uses it to track information and also to be able to look to see how their brand is doing over time, as well as to get perceptions on releasing new products into the marketplace. They talked about many of the things that we just talked about and how they use the information to be able to make these decisions. So it's an incredibly important area for them to be able to do this. Okay, so let's next go to our research problems. So I want to give you a couple examples of research problems that we do to be able to understand how to conduct market research more effectively. And let's talk about this problem. This could be an example of something that you as a marketing manager see, and you see the market research that was done, and you want to evaluate how effective that market research is. So here's a problem. I'll read it to you, and I want you to consider, and then I'll talk a little bit about the outcome of this. So McDonald's is test marketing its new McSushi in 2 cities. We see a little picture of the McSushi over here to the right, Pittsburgh and Houston, and it's trying 2 alternative advertising campaigns. In Houston, it's using the first campaign, Campaign A, to be able to pitch the McSushi. It's a television campaign that's going to be run all throughout Houston. And in Pittsburgh, they're using Campaign B. It's a different television campaign to pitch the McSushi. But they'll be launching exactly the same McSushi product into those 2 markets. What they'd like to be able to figure out is whether they should use Campaign A or Campaign B. Which of their television advertising is more effective? So they have chosen Pittsburgh and Houston as the 2 cities to run that campaign. The results of the test indicate a statistically significantly higher product sales for the 53 stores that customers who saw Campaign A compared to Campaign B. So what does that mean? That means when they ran this campaign and they tracked the sales in Houston versus tracked the sales in Pittsburgh, they found that in Houston that they sold a lot more McSushi than they sold in Pittsburgh. So one of the things that the campaign concludes from that, or the marketing managers conclude, is that maybe Campaign A is better than Campaign B. Maybe we should use the campaign that we launched in Houston. Now we have to think about whether this is actually valid information. So if you were a marketing manager, would you use this information to make the conclusion that Campaign A is really better than Campaign B? So let's first think about all the factors that we want to consider. So remember the 3 things we talked about in causality. This appears to be a causal study. So remember, we had 3 types of studies: exploratory, descriptive, and causal. This is a causal study. And then let's evaluate the 3 elements that we could be thinking about. The first is do we have an appropriate causal order of events? That is, we introduced an ad campaign and we saw the increase in sales. Well, yes, we do. We've introduced an ad campaign in 2 different cities, and then we look at either the increase or decrease in sales. Good, so we got that. B, do we have a concomitant variation? That is, when one changes, the other changes, and when the other changes, the other changes. So an example of this, when we change the ad campaign in Houston, do we see McSushi sales? When we look at the ad campaign in Pittsburgh, do we see McSushi sales? Is there a relationship between the ad campaign and McSushi sales? And yes, we see that. Number 3, is there an alternative explanation that could explain beyond just the effect that the ad campaign has? Are there other things that could explain? I believe that's where in this situation that we could have a real problem. So I'll give you an example. What if people in Pittsburgh just don't eat as much sushi as people in Houston? That there isn't as much of a preference for sushi because the community doesn't have a preference for it. So what we find is that they just buy less sushi. So it might not have anything to do with the ad campaign. It might have everything to do with just the population's preference for sushi. That's an example. So anytime you can think of examples as to why this might not be appropriate, we need to bring them up, we need to discuss them, and we need to consider that within our decision-making framework. And then we have to ask ourselves, would we still use this information to help us make a decision? So that's an example of a market research problem. I'm going to give you one other market research problem as an example. I have 2 comedians here, And you could check them out if you haven't before. I actually think both of them are hilarious, and they actually have very different types of humor. One is Chris Rock. One of the, and these actually are two of the most famous comedians of all time. Chris Rock is extremely popular for his very edgy, somewhat harsh, sarcastic humor that he does, and actually is quite famous for that, and probably one of the most successful comedians of all time. On the other hand, we also have Jerry Seinfeld that's here as well. Jerry Seinfeld uses a more gentle, whimsical form of humor. In fact, Jerry Seinfeld likes to think of himself as one of the best clean comedians in history. That is, that he would never swear or use swearing in his routines, or even he also doesn't use harsh types of humor often in his routines. So there's a difference in the profile of the way the humor gets engaged by these two parties. So one of the things that this company wanted to be able to study is whether for their products it's better for them to use more harsh humor, sarcastic humor, to be able to sell their product, or more gentle, whimsical humor. So what they did is they tested this out with 200 potential customers. So they recruited 200 people, they divided them up randomly, and they put them into two different rooms, 100 people in one room, 100 people in the other. Once settled in their rooms, they introduced them to a new product, and that is a new deodorant. And they said, here's a new deodorant. It's never been sold before. We'd like you to consider the deodorant and think about that, and also watch this ad about it. They showed them in one room an ad with more that uses more harsh, sarcastic humor by Chris Rock, and in the other room they showed them an ad by Jerry Seinfeld. The researchers analyzed the data, and they actually found that the ad with the more gentle humor actually had a much stronger effect, and the harsh humor did not. In fact, they said that it actually reduced persuasion. So the question is does this make sense? Is this correct? Does that actually work versus not work? Is this conclusion correct? There's all kinds of things that we could evaluate. So the question is first of all, if we wanted to look at harsh versus whimsical humor, is this the best way to be able to do it? So the first thing is we definitely have a causal order of events. We have a variation, but could we have an explanation beyond just the type of humor? So the first thing we might ask ourselves is could it be just simply just the people we recruited have different preferences for the comedian that they saw? Generally speaking, the people we recruited just prefer the type of humor that Seinfeld has, or the type of humor that Chris Rock has. It could also be that individuals just have a general preference for the person, Chris Rock versus Seinfeld, or vice versa, and as a result, that affects it. So these types of things, these types of things are challenges to the strategy. So one of the things that the company might do is, first of all, to be able to control for this, is just have an unknown comedian that nobody's aware of deliver these two pitches. One in a more harsh form of humor and one in a more whimsical. So now it's no longer the comedian that's in there delivering, but it's the humor itself. Another thing is we might say, well, somebody might say, well, you know what, that's not going to be good because that comedian that you brought in may actually do a better job of delivering harsh humor than whimsical, or vice versa. So another alternative could be is just have people read a humorous advertisement to take the person out completely and be able to see whether our deodorant is better off being used with respect to whimsical humor than it is harsh humor. So these are some examples of how we analyze or treat or value the context and determine which ad we want to do and how we want to move forward. But these are some typical examples of analysis that we can do. Let me give you one other one. So since the onset of the latest advertising campaign, sometimes you just got to stop and smell the pizza. Pizza Hut has observed a 9% increase in its restaurants nationwide. Thus, the company executives have declared the campaign a resounding success. So they launched this new campaign. The campaign is sometimes you just got to stop and smell the pizza. And as a result of that, we see an increase in 9% in sales. And so they said, wow, we want to just keep going with this. Well, what are some challenges with that? Well, first of all, the first thing we might say is since the campaign, we saw an increase in sales. Will we continue to see an increase in sales when we continue the campaign, or has the campaign been saturated? People have seen it, they've just gotten used to it, the first thing. Another thing, do we know that the campaign itself is what increased sales because it was throughout the whole country? It might just be that it became summertime and throughout the country, and people just eat more pizza during the summer. Or it may be around the time of big events like Super Bowl time where people eat more pizza. So we have to be able to isolate external events that are occurring to be able to take care of this. So this is just a couple examples of how we evaluate causality and make decisions in organizations. So these are examples of the three types of problems: exploratory research, descriptive research, and causal research. Remember, exploratory, some examples of the way we use it. Our sales are declining, we don't know why. Descriptive, what kind of people are buying our products? Who buys our products? Causal, will customers purchase more of our products in a new package? Which of two advertising campaigns is more effective? So I'd like you to understand the differences in the types of problems we use for exploratory, descriptive, and causal research. Anyway, well, thank you for paying attention closely to this chapter, and that should wrap this chapter up. And good luck on everything as we move forward.